Chapter 6. Monster Attack. Sunlight, filtered through the vibrant history of stained glass windows, painted the bustling hall in a kaleidoscope of fractured light. Oranges, blues, and electric yellows danced across the polished wooden floor, illuminating a scene of calculated chaos. Balloons, tethered to nothing but the air, bobbed lazily towards the vaulted ceiling, their pastel skins shimmering with every slight breeze. Tables, groaning like ancient beasts, sagged under the weight of meticulously arranged platters of food. Glistening turkey slices, mountains of fluffy mashed potatoes, and delicate paper-thin cucumber sandwiches. This was a farewell, an ode to the departure of Anna Hashimoto, a vibrant 19-year-old about to embark on her second year of college. She radiated a nervous excitement, a thrilling blend of anticipation, and the bittersweet tug of leaving home. She had been showered with well wishes, whispered advice, and tearful goodbyes, each embrace a reminder of the life she was momentarily stepping away from. The noon service, typically a somber affair, had concluded with an impromptu, and in many ways, tragic farewell party. The elegance of the earlier feast had quickly devolved into soggy paper plates piled high with lukewarm potato salad and half-eaten slices of cake, a testament to the hurried, almost frantic nature of the gathering. A cacophony of voices, laughter, and the clinking of plastic cutlery filled the space, a symphony of farewell that threatened to overwhelm. Jake Foster, 16, visibly uncomfortable in the swirling eddy of conversation and movement, stood awkwardly near the wall. His shoulders were hunched, his gaze fixed on the half-eaten vanilla cupcake clutched in his hand, its frosting slowly melting onto his fingers. The vibrant colors of the hall, usually a source of fascination for him, now felt like 1,000 tiny needles, pricking at his already frayed nerves. The voices, once distinct, had merged into a deafening hum, a wall of sound that pressed in on him from all sides. He longed for the quiet solitude of his room, the predictable rhythm of his favorite television show. Then a warmth cut through the oppressive noise. Even from a distance, her presence was a beacon of calm. She moved through the crowd with an effortless grace, her kind eyes mirroring the turmoil she sensed in him, a gentle understanding that always seemed to find him, even when he tried to hide. She approached him, a soft, genuine smile gracing her lips. "Hey, Jake, having fun?" she asked, her voice a soothing balm against the cacophony. Jake avoided her gaze, shuffling his feet, the cupcake suddenly heavy in his palm. "It's loud," he mumbled, the words barely audible above the din. "I know it is," Anna said, her smile not faltering. She reached out, her fingers gently touching his arm, a comforting anchor in the storm of his agitation. "But everyone here loves you, Jake, and I'll always love and miss you, Jake," she'd said, her hand squeezing his, a final, poignant gesture of affection. Jake looked up then, his eyes usually guarded, wide and vulnerable, reflecting a profound, almost childlike fear. You're really leaving?" The question hung in the air, a fragile plea, echoing the deeper, unspoken fear of abandonment. Anna, nodding, her smile faltering ever so slightly, the weight of her impending departure settling upon her, replied, "College is important, but I'll never forget you, Jake. Promise. I'll visit whenever I can." She gave him a quick, firm hug, a gesture that was both a comfort and a finality. Jake stiffened momentarily, his body a bundle of nerves, then slowly, hesitantly, relaxed into her embrace, clinging to the fleeting warmth. Anna pulled away, a determined glint in her eyes. "You can always call me. I wrote down my number for you." She gestured to a small folded card tucked into his shirt pocket, a secret he hadn't known was there. He touched it hesitantly, his fingers tracing the outline of the paper, a tangible link to a world he feared was slipping away. But her words, meant to comfort, felt hollow, even to her own ears. A pang of guilt twisted in her stomach. She knew college would swallow her whole, demanding every shred of her attention and energy, leaving little room for a friendship with a boy like Jake. a boy who saw the world through a different prism, whose needs were profound, and whose understanding of distance and absence was uniquely his own. The harsh reality was a bitter pill. Their paths, once intertwined, were diverging. As Anna's car, a modest sedan packed to the brim with boxes and dreams, pulled away from the church parking lot, a visible crack appeared in Jake's carefully constructed facade. The forced smile, a flimsy shield against the world's expectations, crumbled, replaced by a desolate emptiness that echoed in the hollow spaces within him. He felt adrift, untethered, the last vestige of belonging ripped away. Emily, now Anna, vanishing into the impenetrable world of adulthood, leaving him behind, stranded on the shores of his own limitations, his own quiet struggles. Jake watched her go, the vehicle shrinking into a distant speck, his face etched with a deep, consuming sadness. The last vestige of hope seemed to drain from his eyes, leaving behind a profound and aching void. That night, the house was a dim, hushed cave. Only the soft glow of the television illuminated the living room, casting dancing shadows on the walls. John and Grace Foster were preparing for a short trip, a grocery run to Moomart, a mundane errand that felt particularly jarring against the heavy quiet left by Anna's departure. John, Jake's father, a man of quiet strength, grabbed his keys and a crumpled grocery list, his movements methodical. Grace, Jake's 14-year-old sister, rolled her eyes with an exasperated groan. Moomart again? Can't we ever go anywhere else?" Her voice, typically boisterous, was subdued, an echo of the day's lingering sadness. John sighed, his patience worn thin. "It's close, Grace, and we need groceries," he said, his tone firm but gentle, "and tonight's specials are fantastic." Grace rolled her eyes again, a more theatrical gesture this time, and turned her attention to Jake. He sat on the worn armchair, his gaze fixed blankly on the cartoon antics of Tom and Jerry. The vibrant colors and exaggerated sounds failing to penetrate the fog that had descended upon him. He didn't seem to be watching the show so much as staring through it. "Jake, are you staying here?" she asked, a hint of her usual sarcasm softened by an underlying concern. No response. "Jake?" John echoed, a knot forming in his stomach. He moved closer, gently touching Jake's shoulder. Jake flinched violently, a gasp escaping his lips, as if jolted awake from a deep, troubled sleep. His eyes, unfocused, darted around the room, eventually landing on his father. "Huh?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "We're going to Moomart," John replied, his hand lingering on Jake's shoulder, a silent reassurance. "You want anything?" Jake shook his head mutely, his gaze returning to the television, though his mind was clearly miles away. "Okay," John said, a fresh wave of worry washing over him. He turned to Grace. "Grace, keep an eye on him, okay?" Grace scoffed, a quick dismissive sound. "Yeah, whatever." It was her usual retort, but the edge was missing. She knew, perhaps better than anyone, how deeply Anna's departure had affected her older brother. John sighed again, a heavier, more weary sound this time, and headed for the door, with Grace following reluctantly, her eyes flicking back to Jake for a moment before she disappeared from view. The click of the lock reverberated in the sudden silence, a stark punctuation mark to Jake's solitude. Left alone, Jake finally succumbed to the overwhelming weight of his sorrow. The invisible ties that bound him to the world had frayed, then snapped, leaving him adrift in a sea of despair. He slipped out the back door, the screen door slapping shut behind him, like a final unforgiving judgment, its sharp report echoing the definitive end of something precious. He didn't know where he was going, only that he had to escape the suffocating walls of the house, the silent judgment of the vacant armchair, the ghost of Anna's smile. He sought solace in the sprawling woods that bordered their property, a place that had always been both a sanctuary and a source of nameless dread. In the daytime, it offered a comforting canopy of green, its familiar paths a solace. But now, under the cloak of twilight, it transformed, becoming something alien and menacing. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, a primal aroma that filled his lungs with a chilling sense of foreboding. The shadows lengthened, stretching like grasping skeletal fingers, twisting the familiar trees into grotesque, unfamiliar shapes. A desperate urge, dark and unfamiliar, began to gnaw at the edges of his mind, a whisper promising oblivion, a release from the relentless gnawing pain that had festered within him since Anna's car had disappeared down the road. A voice, not his own, resonated in the deepest chambers of his mind, a siren song of endless sleep, a final escape from the world's unbearable noise and heartache. He wandered deeper and deeper, the familiar paths twisting and turning, becoming a labyrinth of deepening gloom. The forest, once a comfort, now pressed in on him, its silence more terrifying than any noise. Realizing he was utterly alone, truly alone, he finally found a place, a small secluded hollow, where the trees formed a tight protective circle, a natural amphitheater for his despair. He sank to his knees, the damp earth cold against his skin, and lifted his face to the darkening sky, ready to yield to the suicidal call of despair, to let the overwhelming emptiness consume him entirely. But before he could surrender, a sound pierced the oppressive stillness. A roar, deep, guttural, and utterly feral. It vibrated through the trees, not just a sound reaching his ears, but a primal scream that resonated deep within his bones, sending a jolt of pure, unadulterated terror through Jake's body. He froze, every muscle taut, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird desperately trying to escape its cage. The roar echoed again, closer this time, followed by a sickening crunch, a sound that spoke of bone and flesh being brutally violated, a wet, tearing noise that made his stomach churn. The unnatural symphony of the woods intensified, filled with the sounds of a struggle, of something powerful and savage ripping life away with brutal, unthinking abandon. Curiosity, morbid and irresistible, mingled with his fear, a potent cocktail that compelled him forward, step by hesitant step, dragging Jake deeper into the forest, drawn towards the source of the horrifying cacophony. He had to see, he had to know. The primal urge to witness, to understand the raw violence unfolding before him, was stronger than his fear. He stumbled into a small clearing, his boots sinking into the soft, muddy earth. It was a macabre stage, bathed in the ethereal silver glow of the rising moon, which now peered through a temporary break in the storm clouds. And then he saw it, just beyond the gnarled roots of an ancient oak, whose branches twisted like arthritic fingers against the bruised sky, and the slick, dark surface of fallen leaves, lay the mangled remains of a man and his faithful dog. Their bodies were twisted and broken, limbs splayed at unnatural angles, a grotesque tableau of carnage. The air hung thick with the metallic tang of fresh blood, a hot, coppery stench that burned Jake's nostrils and made his stomach churn with revulsion. He clapped a hand over his mouth, trying to stifle the scream that threatened to erupt. The clouds parted further, and a jagged bolt of lightning, stark and blinding, split the night sky, illuminating the source of the carnage in a terrifying flash. Vargoth. Towering over his kill was a creature that defied logic, a monstrous fusion of theropod dinosaur and nightmare. Scales, dark and shimmering like spilled oil, glistened on its sleek, powerful body in the fleeting electric light. His eyes, pale and predatory, reflected a hunger that went beyond mere physical sustenance, a chilling, insatiable craving for destruction that seemed to gleam from the depths of its malevolent soul. The beast's roar ripped through the air, a sound of triumph and pure, unadulterated power, vibrating in Jake's chest, rattling his teeth. Vargoth shifted his attention, his head swiveling with an unnerving grace, his gaze locking onto the fragile human figure lurking on the fringes of the clearing. Jake, paralyzed by fear so profound it felt like a physical weight, could only stare. He knew, with a certainty that bypassed reason and logic, that he was prey. He was nothing more than a fleeting amusement to this apex predator, a momentary distraction before the kill. He tried to turn, to outrun the inevitable, to escape this unthinkable horror, but his legs felt like lead, rooted to the muddy ground. He stumbled, his boots sinking deeper into the mire, and the roar echoed again, closer this time, a cold, wet breath on the back of his neck. He fought to move, to escape, his mind a frantic, desperate scramble. In a flash of desperate clarity, he pictured his father reading from the Bible, his voice steady and comforting. He saw Anna's kind smile at church, a vision of warmth and belonging. He heard Grace chiding him good-naturedly about chores, a reminder of the ordinary, safe world he had just tried to leave behind. Hope, however frail and wispy, flared within him, a desperate flicker against the encroaching darkness. He screamed, a raw, primal sound ripped from his throat, and shoved himself forward, scrambling on hands and knees, clawing at the muddy earth. But Vargoth was relentless. The creature moved with impossible speed, a blur of muscle and shadow, closing the distance in a terrifying heartbeat. Just as Jake thought he might gain a sliver of ground, a fleeting illusion of escape, the beast's massive claws slashed through the air, deftly catching him. The grip was tighter than any he had ever felt, a vise of bone and muscle that squeezed the air from his lungs. A sickening sense of dread washed over him, a cold, crushing wave that extinguished the flicker of hope, leaving only absolute, paralyzing terror. He felt himself yanked backward, away from the fleeting safety of the forest floor, away from the hope of escape, towards the creature's gaping maw, a cavern of razor-sharp teeth and putrid breath. The weight of despair, heavy and suffocating, pulled him down, 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 into an abyss of terror. His defenses crumbled, shattered by the sheer, overwhelming power of the monster. Darkness started to flood his vision, blurred by the driving rain that now lashed down relentlessly, and the sheer, unadulterated terror that consumed him. Pain erupted, a searing agony that eclipsed all rational thought, all his senses. In that chaotic moment, as the world spun into a vortex of blood and shadows, his heart cried out, a silent, desperate plea for salvation, for an end to the nightmare. Then as he was being dragged away, a sudden violent gust of wind ripped away his mementos. The shark-tooth necklace, a symbol of courage given to him by his father, worn since childhood, snapped with a small sharp sound, and tumbled into the dense undergrowth, lost in the muddy leaves. The small metal cross, a token of his tender faith, was torn from his grasp, its silver glint vanishing amongst the fallen leaves. And finally, his lanyard, brimming with photos of his friends and classmates, a precious archive of connection and belonging, caught on a jagged tree branch. The force ripped it apart, its treasured cargo scattering into the wilderness, each photo a tiny, discarded memory. They fell, scattered and forgotten, like discarded hopes, becoming lost among the whispers of the forest, swallowed by the darkness and the rain. Only the lanyard itself, strangely preserved from getting caught on a tree branch as it fell, rode the rushing current of a nearby stream, a silent, solitary voyager. It bobbed and swirled over treacherous rocks and through swirling eddies, carried on a relentless journey until it finally landed on Jake's front porch, a silent messenger of the horrors within the forest, a stark testament to the terror that had just unfolded. Vargoth reveled in his conquest, a high, maniacal laugh rumbling in his massive chest as he vanished into the deeper shadows, taking his prize with him. The rain fell harder, drenching the forest in an unrelenting fury, a natural cleansing. It drowned out the echoes of Jake's screams, erasing the memory of a boy lost to the darkness, leaving in its wake only the unshakable presence of a monster that feasted not just on flesh, but on the hopes and dreams of the innocent, a chilling, malevolent force now unleashed upon the world.